When you stare at any object, what do you see? You may be tempted to say that you see the name of the object in focus, but is this really what you see? Let's say your eyes come across an apple on the table. It immediately registers to you that what you're looking at is an apple, plain as day. But what happens when, instead of giving it a passing glance, you let the apple consume your attention? If you're a person who's easily distractible, you might actually find this to be a hard task to engage in for very long. You may find that after a few seconds of gazing into the apple, that your mind has wandered off, distracted by the thought of what you're going to eat for lunch, or what you're going to wear for work, or something embarrassing that you said in front of an audience one day. However, if you're feeling clear-headed enough, you should be able to remain more or less focused on the apple for a longer period of time. During your gaze, you'll notice the shape of the apple, its stem, any patterns or bruises on its skin, maybe how it sits on the table, or its size in relation to other objects. Pretty soon you'll discover that there's not much to analyze about an apple, and if you aren't already distracted at this point, your mind will begin to embellish upon the apple, with thoughts about the last time you ate an apple, what grocery store it came from, how much you paid for the apple, the annoyance over the fact that the supermarket was sold out of Gala apples so you had to settle for Red Delicious, or how the apple you're looking at could have possibly grown from a tree that itself sprouted from an apple seed no bigger than a grain of rice. Take a moment to recognize what has happened here. Before you realize it, your mind has taken you away from the actual apple in your gaze and has created stories to embellish the apple of focus and relate it to apples in general. Is this truly paying attention to the apple? Or is this another form of distraction, as if your mind wandered off apples entirely? The answer is the latter, because the more we disassociate from raw experience, which is merely the sensual data that we perceive, the more we distract our attention and the less mindful we become. As you may have already figured out, the way in which we deviate from raw experience is through the formation of concepts. Typically, as in the example of the apple, we form concepts on top of one another without even realizing it. In the thought digression I described earlier, the apple was conceptualized as having a particular taste, being a particular variety, being a purchasable good, and something with seeds that grows on trees. These are all higher order concepts that are easy for us to recognize as such upon reflection. But in truth, as soon as we look at an apple and think apple, we already become distracted by a concept, the concept of an apple. Nothing about raw experience indicates that what you are looking at is, in fact, an apple. The raw experience of vision is simply patterns of light, color, and shadow. The thought of apple is the mind's interpretation of, in this case, visual data based on a recognition of patterns formed in memory. The message here isn't to try to stop forming concepts about the world in which we live. Rather, it's to recognize that raw experience is separate from and prior to concepts. Moreover, just as the human mind has the ability to conceptualize experience, it also has the ability to deconceptualize experience, which is something that we discover from insight meditation and being truly mindful. Mindfulness is the ability not only to notice sights, smells, sounds, tastes, and bodily sensations in their raw forms, but also to notice the concepts that tend to overshadow our experience of the present moment, which are merely a collection of thoughts. In this same way, the concept of self is merely a collection of thoughts, a story that is created by the mind based on its interpretation of raw experience, just like the apple on the table. Once we notice that the feeling of self is propagated by a series of ongoing thoughts that distract our attention, those thoughts become more and more transient and ultimately vanish for a period of time, even if for only a few seconds. I talk more about selflessness in my video about the journey to spiritual enlightenment, but I'll just say for now that being completely mindful is an inherently selfless experience. You might be wondering at this point why all of this is important, and it's important for two reasons. One is because we want to understand reality. That is, we want to understand what is true and what isn't true about the nature of the human mind, which will go a long way to our living in a world that maximizes human happiness and human well-being. The second reason is because the ability to separate concepts from raw experience helps us to alleviate personal suffering. This is because, instead of being distracted by and feeling identified with negative emotional states, we can actually notice the changes in raw experience that bring on suffering. Examples of this might be hyperventilation, a fast heartbeat, tense muscles, or a tingling sensation in your chest or stomach. Just paying attention to these sensations alone can go a long way toward alleviating anxiety, anger, embarrassment, and other negative emotions, because the more you notice how these emotions are expressed, the more impartial they become and the less weight they carry. These emotions also express themselves by causing certain negative thoughts to recur over and over again, oftentimes in a circular pattern. In the same way as with physical sensations, the noticing and scrutinizing of these thoughts, rather than being consumed by them, robs them of their emotional weight and your identification with them, thereby allowing you to relax and passively notice those negative thoughts if they're still arising. What I want to leave you with here is that it's always important to connect with experience, even if you don't formally meditate. Although concepts are vital to our survival, our ability to orient ourselves to our surroundings, and our ability to live happy, healthy, and fulfilling lives, negative concepts can hold us back and lead to a lot of unnecessary suffering. The ability to notice how negative emotions affect us physically and mentally is the ability to disassociate ourselves from our thoughts and emotions and bring us in harmony with the world we perceive.